Hello, everyone. I welcome you very wholeheartedly to this pre-presidency conference. My name is Funda Tekin, and I'm one of the directors at Institut für Europäische Politik in Berlin. And I have the pleasure, actually, to kickstarting the German pre-presidency conference, which is organized by IEP in cooperation with the Trans-European Policy Studies Association. It is neither the first TEPSA pre-presidency conference, which we call PPC, as TEPSA has a long tradition of organizing conferences at the eve of each incoming presidency. It is also not the first German PPC, as IEP had the pleasure of organizing the last German PPC at the end of 2006. But it's definitely the first virtual edition of such a conference. We all know the reasons for that, and I'm excited and delighted to see that so many of you have decided to meet in different virtual rooms throughout today and tomorrow for discussing the shape of the future of Europe in such special times. I'm sure that it's also neither your first nor your last virtual conference or meeting. But as we are going to spend the next 2 days virtually together, I wanted to give you a brief overview on how we structured this event before we start into the first session of the conference. Each session of the conference will start with a brief technical intro. And hence, in a minute, I will hand over to Thomas Kluchert from Brainstorming, who are supporting us, and he is our technical host of today. We will then listen to the welcoming remarks, and I will guide you into the first panel, which we called the Youth Ideas panel, right afterwards. This session concludes after hopefully very lively and interactive discussions at 12:30 or 12:35, 40, depending actually on how lively the discussions will be. After lunch break, we will reconvene at 2 p.m. for discussing the EU's differentiated future after Brexit. And from 4:30 to 5:30, we will have the chance of meeting in 3 parallel roundtables for discussing migration and asylum, enlargement and European neighborhood policy, and the European Green Deal. But our discussions won't end there. We will deal with the EU's external dimension tomorrow morning between 9:30 and 10:30, and discuss institutional reforms, European social cohesion and social security, as well as yet another discussion on youth ideas in another set of parallel roundtables from 11:30 to 12:30. Before we have the pleasure of listening to concluding remarks from Lucia Mokra, chairperson of the TEPSA board, and Jim Close, Deputy Director General of the General Secretariat of the Council of the European Union, right afterwards. Right at the start of this conference, I should also not forget to express my thank you to the organizing teams, both at TEPSA and IIP, who had adapted this conference into this virtual format without the endless efforts, we would not be meeting today. And my special thanks go to Vittoria Meissner, who was the lead organizer at IIP. We also thank the Federal Foreign Office, the European Commission, and the Stiftung Mercator for their financial support. In case I should encounter technical problems and might not be able to speak to you today anymore, do not worry. Jana Schubert from IIP is the backup moderator to the session, and she will also support me during the Q&A session at the end of this section. Herewith, I open the first panel of this conference, the Youth Ideas panel, Shaping the Future of Europe. And as the previous speakers have already outlined, the German government is taking over the presidency in yet very challenging times. At the same time, expectations for leadership throughout the European Union are high, as are hopes that the presidency will give substance to the claim Together for Europe's recovery. We really have to say that Germany has the unenviable task, not only of guiding the Union and its member states out of the crisis generated by the COVID-19 pandemic, but also of encouraging them to design a credible strategy for longer-term reform. The German government and officials have already, I have to say, successfully overcome the first challenge of having to redraft and reprioritize its program in view of the COVID-19 pandemic, and have it finalized still before the presidency. And the priorities, or at least the outline of the priorities, have just been launched the other day. During this panel, we want to shed light on those priorities of the German presidency and discuss them in view of youth ideas as well as recommendations. that TEPSA traditionally formulates for each incoming council presidency. I should mention that they are formulated by experts from the TEPSA network without necessarily representing the views of TEPSA or its member institutes. This set of TEPSA recommendation to the incoming German EU presidency has been compiled by Nicoletta Pirozzi, Ilke Teuge, and myself, with contributions from Michelle Chang, Gabi Umbach, Saila Heinikowski, and Niklas Helwig. And I'm drawing from them for this moderation. But they are also accessible at this conference website in English and in German. Additionally, IAP took the decision to lend the younger generation an ear and give them a voice regarding the future of Europe. Because how can you discuss how to shape the future without involving those who are most affected by it? Within the framework of the Engage Your Council project, we convened young people from 3 countries of the incoming trio presidency, Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia, within a virtual Engage Your Council think tank. Needless to say that initial plans had also focused on a series of face-to-face meetings. A group of highly motivated 24 young participants brainstormed and discussed ideas and selected the most prominent ones within an ideas challenge. 4 rapporteurs will be presenting their ideas to all of us today. But before we start into the session, please allow me to hand over to Werner Hoyer, who is President of the European Investment Bank and President of IAP. I'm delighted and grateful that he has been able to spare some minutes to open this panel and share his thoughts with us during these important times for Europe and for Germany as it takes over the presidency. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, von der Tickin. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to this pre-presidency conference. Of course, like most of you, I would have loved to be in Berlin today, but circumstances do not allow. And I would love to stay for the entire conference, even if it's virtual, but even this is not possible because today it fits perfectly. I have my first physical meeting in Brussels again with the European Commission, negotiating hopefully the end phase of the negotiations on the MFF. So I apologize for leaving soon after Mr. Dittmann has spoken. At the Institute for European Politics, we seek to be a hub for expertise on European affairs and European integration. This is why this conference is so important to us. It provides a forum for policymakers, researchers, as well as young Europeans to share their expectations for this upcoming presidency and to provide their ideas on where we should be headed. I'm grateful to the organizers from TEPSA, from EIP, for putting this event together despite the difficult situation. And I'd like to use the opportunity to thank the sponsors of this event, Auswärtiges Amt, Federal Foreign Office, Stiftung Mercator, the Europe for Citizens program of the European Commission, Horizon 2020 project, INDIF EU, and the Jean Monnet project track. This conference could not have been possible without your support. Thank you very much. And finally, let me express my gratitude to all the very distinguished speakers who have kindly agreed to join us today. Ladies and gentlemen, holding the presidency of the European Union in the middle of the corona crisis is a challenging task. It is also, however, a unique opportunity. We have spent too much time in recent years on the question of how to preserve the status quo and too little time on how we want to shape the future. The discussions on how to kickstart our economies after the corona lockdown will be a central element to this Council presidency. This offers a unique opportunity to influence the direction of travel in the European Union for years to come. The upcoming German presidency has the potential to be as important as the last one. Back in 2007, the same trio presidency, which, by the way, was the first ever trio presidency, set the grounds for the Treaty of Lisbon and put the Union on a clear modernization path. The elements of the German presidency program that we know already go, in my view, in the right direction. The declared ambitions are to foster a sustainable and inclusive growth while integrating the green transition as well as the digital transformation, and to strengthen the EU's role in the world stage, on the world stage. Indeed, what better way to break with past than moving from an economy that was fueled by the idea of the European coal and steel community to the one that aspires to decouple growth from fossil fuel consumption altogether. Leaving aside the symbolic importance of turning the page in this way, a green recovery is the right way forward for Europe for several reasons. First, the fight against climate change has become a necessity. If we want to avoid catastrophic developments, we have to act now. The IPCC clearly indicated the years to 2030 as our last window of opportunity to avert catastrophic climate change. Second, the vision of green recovery, more than any other initiative, has broad-based support across all member states. According to the latest Eurobarometer, 93% of Europeans believe that climate change is a serious problem. 79% see it as a very serious problem. And third, choosing the fight against climate change as part of a shared new vision for Europe makes sense economically. Our economists estimate that over the coming years, the global market for environmental technologies and products will grow at around 10% annually. We need to be in a position to take full advantage of this opportunity and be the market leaders. However, to achieve these ambitions, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot rely on existing technologies only. To give you an illustration, International Energy Agency predicts for 2020 an 8% fall in greenhouse gas emissions, larger than any year-on-year reduction in recorded history. And while this may sound like positive news, you need to know that if we want to maintain the global temperature increase below 1.5 degrees, we need a similar reduction every single year until 2030. It is clear that this is not possible with our current technologies. Unfortunately, at present, I do not see that we are doing even close to enough to develop these technologies. For more than 15 years now, the EU has spent about 1.5 percentage points of GDP less in RDI than our main competitors in the US, South Korea, and China. Also, we must not limit our fight against climate change to the European Union, even before Corona. The challenges posed by climate change and rapid population growth meant a close, insurmountable challenge to big parts of the development world. At Corona, and we have, if we do not intervene quickly and effectively, what could easily become a triad of humanitarian, economic, and geopolitical crises. Europe needs to show its presence now. Ladies and gentlemen, China does not only have the largest number of coal power plants in the world, it also funds such plants on a massive scale in other countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia, Vietnam, several African countries, as well as in Europe, Serbia, Turkey, and Georgia. If we do not offer an attractive European alternative to this, we will not only lose our fight against climate change, we will also fail to live up to our moral responsibility towards some of the poorest regions in the world at what is most certainly a challenge of a lifetime. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me stop here and pass the word back to Funda Tekin, who will moderate this panel. I'm looking forward to listening to Axel Littmann, the Director for EU Institutional Affairs, Brexit, and EU Coordination at the Federal Foreign Office, old colleague of mine. Well, he's young, but I'm old, who will provide us with detailed insights into the Council Presidency's program. And then we listen to 4 participants of the Engage Your Council project who have agreed to share the views of the younger generation on the upcoming Council Presidency today. Thank you very much for having accepted our invitation and for being with us today. All the best.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer, for your very insightful and inspiring welcome remarks. You have kind of given a broad overview of the challenges and the things ahead and that we have to deal with. So thank you very much. And in the beginning, we encountered the first technical problems a bit, but we could hear you all the way and see you at the end also very clearly. So thank you for your welcoming remarks. And I'm also myself delighted to give over the floor to Mr. Axel Littmann, who is Director of EU Institutional Affairs, Brexit, EU Coordination, and the EU 2020 presidency at the German Federal Foreign Office. So I'm sure he has been extremely busy those past weeks, and with being responsible also for Brexit, he's definitely facing an intense second half of this year, I have to say. So we are grateful that Mr. Dittmann agreed to share with us some information on the priorities of the German presidency and to discuss them afterwards with the young generation and later with all of us. And in terms of some expectation management, we have to keep in mind that the rotating presidency is working only on a 6-month terms. Hence, in view of all those pressing issues, in addition to the COVID-19 pandemic, the German government will be well advised to choose the topics wisely, but still to invest boldly and smartly in the future of Europe. To us, this implies, among other things, political will by leaders, courageous action by institutions, and support by citizens. The priorities defined by the presidency seem to be recovery, the MFF, of course, Brexit, and all the other pressing issues and topics that are ahead of us. So what does this imply? And I'm very interested in listening to Mr. Dittmann. And Mr. Dittmann, the floor is yours.
So, dear Funda Tekin, thank you so much for inviting me to make a few remarks on the presidency. Thank you also for the words of welcome to Jaap de Zwaan and Frank Schimmelpfennig, and of course to Werner Hoyer, my former boss. It's always a big pleasure. And when preparing for the session, there were really quite a number of colleagues who asked me to pass very special greetings to you. In 1 week, we will start the presidency. So to be more precise, it's going to be 6 days. Yesterday, the cabinet, the federal government has agreed on the program. It has already been widely reported, but we will only officially distribute it next week, immediately before the presidency, as is good habit. We are still in the last week of the Croatian presidency, but now it's really getting serious and we are getting ready to go for our 13th presidency, the last one, as Werner Hoyer was saying, in 2007, of course, with the very important result of bringing about over the finishing line the Treaty of, which was to become then the Treaty of Lisbon, which is already one thing I think to bear in mind. We will operate under quite a different institutional setting, with a permanent chair in the European Council, with a permanent chair in the Foreign Affairs Council. So I think that is a difference which is important to bear in mind. But nevertheless, the presidency has an important role, and we feel and we hear a lot of expectations, and also there I think it is important to recall also what Funda Tekin just said. It's 6 months. Sorry, we have to also work on the basis of proposals, concrete projects, which are mostly emanate from the Commission. We will not be able to solve everything in the next 6 months, but it is true that important issues are on the table, and we want to make a forceful contribution to moving those ahead. And the motto of our presidency, also to be precise in English, is "Together for Europe's Recovery." And we want to really make our contribution to make the EU stronger, fairer, more competitive, and more sustainable. And there are a number of issues on the table. Some of the most important have been mentioned already. And let me maybe walk you through some of those. And then I'm really very much looking forward to a discussion. Before I start, also what was mentioned by Jaap de Zwaan, our work is happening in a number of different overall frameworks. Absolutely crucial, of course, the strategic agenda of the European Council, and now more precisely, or time-wise, a bit more in the current setting is our trio presidency together with Slovenia and Portugal, Germany, Portugal, Slovenia. Same trio presidency as in 2007. We have a very, very close, good cooperation. We had numerous meetings. The trio in preparing the trio presidency, which of course is not the trio presidency, but the 18-month presidency of the entire council. Last meeting, also by video conference of the heads of state, government, with Angela Merkel on our side at the beginning of this week. So we are also getting ready to go together in our trio presidency, where we have really a very good cooperation. Now, let's look at the big issues we have to do. We were very much prepared to start, or with the presidency, I wouldn't say ready to go, but pretty much had all the priorities set, I would say sometime in March. And then COVID-19 pandemic really hit us all, and we had to rearrange, rethink our presidency. First of all, we had to look at the substance, the priorities, and we had to rethink the presidency. Managing, overcoming Corona is now clearly at the center of the presidency. This is what we have to do, and at the same time, there are other crucial topics, some of which have been mentioned already, which we also want to move forward. So we want to really focus on Corona, COVID-19, but it's by far not the only one. The other thing we have to really scramble a bit is, of course, the whole physical and organizational challenges. I think one should not underestimate that. We went in March, and I think it was really, I would say, heroic effort which the Croatian presidency, and we're very grateful to the Croatian presidency, made in really keeping the whole functioning of the council together with the secretariat, because we went basically from a meeting capacity of 100% to 10%. And we are slowly building this up, and a lot of work is going on making also getting the whole physical video conference infrastructure in place. Function of the we want to move back to as normal as possible functionings, that the month of July will still be very much a virtual presidency, with a big and important exception of a meeting of the heads of state and government on the 17th of 18th July, which is planned to be a physical meeting, very important, and I'll come to that. And then we will slowly can back to mostly physical meetings after the summer break, but there are many question marks, of course, and unknowns, uncertainties, and so a lot of our efforts is together with the council secretary also on being able to hold virtual meetings to be as effective as possible, because we want to move forward together on the substance. So coordinating our efforts to overcome the pandemic is a top priority. We have to, of course, continue to manage the corona-related health crisis. We want to lift together in a coordinating manner remaining restrictions which were imposed also on the national level, which was, of course, not an easy start. When I speak about Schengen, but also restriction in the single market. So that's a big issue. And then we want to pursue inclusive strategy for growth, for recovery, social recovery, economic recovery. And then we also want to draw together lessons learned. Where do we need more European sovereignty when we speak about procurement of medical equipment, production facilities, vaccination, our crisis management. So this lessons learned aspect with relation to COVID-19 will be important. But of course, very in the center will be the economic and social recovery, mentioned by some of you already, and that will be the discussions on the next MFF, the multi-annual financial framework, and of course the recovery fund, the recovery program, next generation EU instrument, together I think to the tune of 1.8 trillion euro. I think that France and Germany together made a very important contribution to this with the announcement, I think on the 18th of May, of a possibility, a proposal to dedicate here 500 billion euro, also to make the possibility to distribute those to overcome COVID crisis. And we are happy that the Commission took a large number of these suggestions on board. And now we will have a very important and very complex discussion among the member states. It will be an absolute priority for us in Brussels also to prepare that in the COREPER, and then in the General Affairs Council, moving to this physical meeting of the heads of state and government in the midst of July. And it is important that we try to agree this, if possible, before the summer break, because we want this big package to be ready to go on the 1st of January. And to do that, we have a very important discussions also and necessary agreement of the European Parliament. And then also make a lot of technical work to get all the regulations right. And we have also, in order to be able to do the next generation EU instrument with the Commission going to the capital markets and issue bonds there. We need to amend the own resources decision, which means we need to have a ratification in all the member states. So really time is an issue, and I think it's fair to say that this will be the topic in the month of July. And we are really determined to make our contribution there. The presidency will, of course, be more. And another topic which was mentioned by Jaap de Zwaan is the negotiations between the EU and the United Kingdom. This Tuesday, 4 years ago. So already quite some time, we are really very much involved on this issue. And we're coming now to the final stage of defining the future relationship with the United Kingdom, which we want to remain a key strategic partner. Well, we much time decision by the United Kingdom not to seek an extension of the so-called transition period, which we would have thought would have been a good idea. But so now it is very clear, the transition period will end on the 31st of December, which means we will have to try to negotiate this comprehensive agreement until the autumn, September, October, because also this agreement will have to be ratified afterwards. And so I think it is fair to say that this decision and these negotiations will be very much a center stage, a big priority right after the summer break. We welcome that we now have an increased rhythm of negotiations, which will start this Monday between the teams of the two negotiators. For the EU is Michel Barnier, for the UK, David Frost. And as a presidency, I have to say, we will of course play a role, but the negotiations are being handled by the EU negotiator, which is Michel Barnier. And this unity of action moving about, I think has characterized how the EU27 have acted on this file all along the way. And we will of course keep that. We will also look very much at the implementation of the withdrawal agreement with regard to citizens, and also with regard to the Northern Ireland Protocol, a very important issue. So EU-UK, another big file. Then we also want to move ahead key priorities defined in the strategic agenda, defined also in the Commission's work program, and I would say there, as Werner Hoyer was mentioning, digitalization and the Green Deal. Absolutely crucial. And of course, it will not be so easy for the presidency to for example, if you look at the Green Deal, because also Corona related, you see that there has been also some postponement. If you look at, for example, the COP26 in Glasgow, which has been postponed to last year, but we determined do what we can to move this ahead. One issue mentioned by Werner Hoyer, absolutely crucial, the green recovery. So it will play already a very big role in the financial negotiations, and there we are very much determined also to contribute to that. But then we want to also move ahead other issues and elements of the European Green Deal. For your example, European law, important for implementing Paris. Also to agree on the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions for 2030, and that is also something which we want to move ahead. Digitalization, the Commission has made a number of proposals, communications on artificial intelligence, on other aspects, and we want to move these ahead in our presidency, but we'll have to see when we will get also concrete legislative proposals. So digitalization, as we are here, plays a big role. We want to move this. We have to want to move this file, but we also have to see where do we stand in issues coming from the Commission. And I would honestly have to say that I guess that in the real, apart from now the financial aspect, the real work on legislative files will, I think, start only at the end of our presidency. European solidarity, social cohesions, very important for us, thinking about a framework of minimum wages, minimum security schemes. The Commission has announced that it will, in addition to SURE, is working on a European unemployment reinsurance scheme, which we would then look at in the Council. We want to work on tackling youth unemployment, to strengthen the youth guarantee, and of course, which we as a German presidency will focus on. EU's migration and asylum policy, mentioned also a very big issue, and this is also something which has been stalled, was a divisive issue for many years. We really are encouraging the Commission to make a concrete proposal now to reform the common European asylum system based on solidarity and shared responsibility. So we hope that the Commission will make a proposal soon, so that we can take that up. We know it was always a difficult fight, but we want to really focus on that. But we, of course, don't want to only look at the common European asylum system, but also look very much to cooperation partnership with the countries of origin, transit, and destination, and to really focus on the whole aspects, both the internal and the external dimension in asylum and migration. Rule of law is another issue close to where we have a big interest, something which we will discuss also in the General Affairs Council. And we are looking forward to the Commission, who will publish a rule of law report, the first rule of law report, in September. And we want to take that up in the General Affairs Council to have a discussion both on horizontal issues, but also on country-specific chapters. And that is something which comes in addition, it's not a substitute, in addition to the work on other rule of law instruments. We have infringement procedures, Article 7, but we also want to have a new preventive rule of law mechanism. Rule of law, really one of the most central foundations of the European Union. And let me maybe finally say something on external relations. Of course, very close to us and very important, a partnership with our neighbors, Western Balkans, Eastern and Southern neighborhood. The Croatian presidency has really made it possible that we can start, they can take a decision to start negotiations with Northern Macedonia and Albania. And this is something that we want to move ahead, if possibly do, if the conditions set are there. We want to also strengthen our partnership with Africa. The EU-AU summit is scheduled in autumn, and that is something we have to see how we can implement it, in which format, but it is on the agenda. We are looking forward, we're preparing for that. Broad partnership with Africa, not just managing COVID, but really going ahead. EU-China. EU-China is, of course, a pity that we had to postpone the planned leaders meeting on the 14th of September. We will be looking for a new date. And this is an important issue for us to really try to bring about a united approach versus China, to really have that was also the idea, to have the EU 27 together sitting there with China. And on other external relations files, we want to support the High Representative in his efforts on key CFSP dossiers, Libya, Sahel, Iran, JCPOA, and others. We are looking to revitalize Russia, America, and also we want to look at the overall functioning of the EU foreign security policy, which we want to debate. So the whole aspect of finally, a word on the conference on the future of Europe, mentioned by you. We have now a joint position of the Council on this. Now we as a presidency will start to negotiate with the other institutions a joint mandate, and with a view of the start of the conference on the future of Europe, to really discuss where do we want to see the EU in 10 to 20 years, what are the big issues with the together with European citizens, very important. And we have to really see also the framework, the positions we have with the pandemic, when is then the best date and setting to launch this conference. But now with a joint council position, I think we took an important step to really go into much more detailed planning. If I may, and sorry for being so long, but it's really a large number of issues really on our plate. I would like to point out that, of course, the presidency also is not just about looking at the different files. We also have a cultural program. We have had a very close cooperation and with the artist Olafur Eliasson, who has created, among other things, a digital project involving children and the youth, and it is called Earth Speaker. You can find it on the internet. It will launch on the 1st of July. There will be an app, and it is an European-wide participatory arts project, which will encourage young people, aims to encourage young people to participate in the discussion about the future of the EU and also more globally. So I think we have quite a large number of issues. We want to prioritize it. COVID is on the top of the agenda, but we want to be broader than a Corona presidency. And we are looking forward to working together with the trio foremost, but with all our partners. And we'll try to make our contribution so that the EU comes stronger out of the crisis than it entered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dittmann, for this indeed very insightful and detailed presentation of, well, the huge plate you have to deal with during the next upcoming 6 months. I saw that there were already some questions in the Q&A section, but before I would want to open the question to the audience, we planned to engage 4 young people who have actually elaborated and discussed their ideas for the future of Europe throughout the past 6 weeks. And I think it's also interesting to see that we launched that project before COVID-19 really hit. So they were dealing with broad areas that, of course, are affected by the COVID-19 crisis, but go a bit beyond that. So it's migration and asylum, foreign policy, climate policy, and the future of Europe. And without further ado, I would want to invite Simon Happersberger to present the ideas. I think we lost Mr. Dittmann. Yes, yeah, I think we should nevertheless give Simon Happersberger the floor to present his ideas on migration and asylum. And meanwhile, we're going to try to reconnect to Mr. Dittmann. Simon, the floor is yours.
So, thank you very much. So, 15,000 people have died at European borders in the Mediterranean since 2015. Many more have experienced human rights violations, informal pushbacks, gender-based violence, overcrowded refugee camps. The EU migration and asylum policy is in a deadlock. However, thousands of Europeans, NGOs, municipalities who are engaged for refugees and migrants show the EU can do better. The Delegation for Migration and Asylum demands to build up on disengagement and end the current humanitarian tragedy. Firstly, the dying in the Mediterranean is untenable. Any return policy to conflict-torn countries like Libya is untenable. Overcrowded asylum camps on the Aegean Islands are unacceptable and undermining any European standards of migration. Instead, EU member states should redeploy a common European search and rescue mission. They must ensure the principle of non-refoulement and handle asylum cases on an individual basis. They should reactivate the EU relocation mechanism to prevent the spread of the coronavirus in refugee camps. Secondly, the criminalization of refugee organizations must be stopped. Thousands of Europeans engage in numerous NGOs to provide search and rescue operations and facilitate integration. They supplement EU member states in their task to protect migrants and refugees. Moreover, NGOs have collected a lot of knowledge on the ground. EU member states should create contact points and formal complaint procedures for NGOs to integrate this knowledge and facilitate the oversight of state action. Thirdly, support local and regional coalitions of the willing. Solidarity cities, Eurocities, cities of safe harbors. In Germany alone, there are 120 municipalities who declared their solidarity with refugees. This local engagement is far too often stopped from national policies in the EU. Thus, municipalities and regions that take in refugees on a voluntary basis should be supported to do so. The EU Commission should reimburse not only costs of integration, but provide additional financial support for municipal development. Last Saturday was World Refugee Day. It remembers not only the 80 million people forcibly displaced worldwide, it remembers also that the EU has committed to ensure refugee rights in the Geneva Convention and the European Convention on Human Rights. Therefore, we urge the German Council presidency and the upcoming trio presidency to end the current deadlock with the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, act in European solidarity, and realize its own human rights commitments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Simon, for these very clear-cut ideas. And I'm sure that Mr. Dittmann has some thoughts on them. I'm not yet sure whether he's going to be able, he's currently being able to hear us. But what I would want to take up one particular point that also relates to the TEPSA recommendations, because there Saila Heinikowski kind of linked migration and asylum policy also to strengthening the EU's resilience, which is important these days. So the EU's core values need to be at the center of it, and so we also highlight the need to stop violations of human rights at the EU's external borders. So pretty much in line what your thoughts were, and reforms of the common European asylum systems desperately needed. So we are all waiting also for the new pact on migration and asylum, I guess. But there is one elephant in the room, and I think that is the term solidarity. Because while with the TEPSA recommendation, we call for reforms in the spirit of joint solidarity, and I think also Mr. Dittmann was referring to it. The Federal Minister of Interior has just recently digged out the term flexible solidarity, which was a term which kind of appeared back in 2015. So I'm wondering how much flexibility can there be in solidarity? And Simon was just referring to the so-called coalition of the willing and how this could look like. Finally, the youth ideas did not make explicit references to Schengen, and the TEPSA recommendations recommend better coordination between member states' internal police checks, replacing border controls. So basically this is a rich bouquet of thoughts, and I would want to give Mr. Dittmann the opportunity to, basically to react to that, and he is still there. I don't know, were you able to listen to some? Do you want to react?
Yeah, well, as I said, migration and asylum is a very big priority, and what we want to do is to have a solution and approach with all the dimensions, internal dimension, external dimension, looking at the common European asylum policy, also looking very much on strengthening the partnership with the countries of origin and transit. I think this is something which is important. We have to make available the funding which you mentioned. So that is a big issue also in the new multi-annual financial framework. And when it comes to the solidarity, I think Germany is already participating and has also made quite a contribution in coalitions of the willing. But of course, here we will try to look, of course, also for a European solution. So this is an important issue. We are aware how important it is, and we are having close contact with the European Commission, also looking forward to their concrete proposal, which we want to then really push forward in the work with the other member states.
Well, thank you. I think because time is pressing a bit, I'm really just going to go without any further ado, hand over to Masha Ojberg, from who is the rapporteur for the foreign policy section of the youth ideas, and let's see what she can share with us with regards to this topic.
Thank you. We are living in a challenging new international environment, and the EU has been struggling to assert its influence on the world stage. The Delegation for Foreign Policy has tackled this in light of current global tensions, ever more topical issue, in order to streamline joint action in common foreign and security policy and achieve greater strategic autonomy of the EU as a foreign policy actor. We therefore call upon the German Council presidency and the trio presidency to firstly change the way EU reaches foreign policy decisions by introducing qualified majority voting through activating the Passerelle clause. This should be applied to threats to human rights, sanctions, EU humanitarian assistance, and civilian CSDP missions. Secondly, to actively protect and enforce Europe's values and human rights through strategic use of its external action tools, such as strengthening EU's capacity to deploy military and civilian CSDP missions in new and long-standing complex conflicts. Here, we already welcome the initiative of establishing a new European Center of Excellence for Civilian Crisis Management in Berlin. Then, reforming the Geneva Convention on Refugees to better respond to displacement issues today, and to overcome the deadlock at the WTO, especially when it comes to the appellate body. And last but not least, under this point, undertaking an even more ambitious climate diplomacy in free trade talks and agreements. Thirdly, we call to reform the EU official development assistance by, in short term, initiating the implementation of immediate steps from the Group of Wise Persons report on development finance architecture, with a special focus on strengthening the political and strategic guidance on development policy. And in medium term, initiate a discussion as part of the Conference on the Future of Europe to further strengthen the consensus on EU development. In a fast-changing and multipolar world dominated by foreign power politics, the EU must become a stronger foreign policy actor. For that, the German Council presidency, the trio presidency, the European Council, and of course also the member states should take note of our proposed measures, because future steps need to be big and bold to create a more decisive and effective new way of doing European foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Masha, for this also very clear, clear set of ideas. And I have to say that I'm really impressed also by the level of technicalities those ideas have already reached and entail. I think one question that one could draw out of that directly also for Mr. Dittmann would be because you know, you claim to introduce a qualified majority vote for CFSP, which is not a new claim, but do you think the European Council will soon reach consensus on its implementation? And will Germany actively promote this idea during the presidency? That is one question. And also drawing a bit from the TAPSA recommendations, I think here we discussed also the challenge of and the need to bridge divides between member states as a united Europe is required, and highlighting there the importance of a strategic compass. It's also one thing that was not mentioned by the youth ideas, but you were referring to it also, Mr. Dittmann, with regards to the EU-China summit. And would you also perceive the postponement of this EU-China summit as an opportunity to reassess the EU-China relations in view of certain actions? And then finally, and you were mentioning it with regards to the enlargement procedure, and Niklas Helwig in the recommendations framed it that in a world on fire, the EU needs a ring of friends. I like that wordplay. But you were mentioning, of course, Serbia and Montenegro, and also start negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. But maybe a more challenging aspect is also the question of Turkey, because I have so far not read or heard about Turkey in any of the presidency pre-discussions, prominently at least, and I think we should not forget about the difficulty of that relations, and that we should also move forward in that regard. So if you would want to, or feel inspired to briefly reply to those points. Thank you.
Thank you. Many questions and many important points for which I would like to thank the panel. On the question of qualified majority, it is something which we believe would be important to move also our effectiveness, our capacity to act in the area of external relations. And so that is something that we will certainly pursue during our presidency. You know that there is also different views on that among member states. So I think one has to be realistic and say this is not something which will be an easy topic. So we will certainly pursue that discussion, but I am not sure about the concrete deliverables that we will be able to get on this topic, but important absolutely for us. When it comes, we want to strengthen then our CFSP, CSDP, and external actions overall. And there's a number of other projects which we are doing. One is to work together with the European External Action Service to develop a so-called strategic compass to really have a security policy framework document on the basis developing of the global strategy of 2016. To really look at the area of security and defense, also to develop the EU there. We want to work on the integrated approach, which really groups the different actors in EU foreign policy together. We have the Team Europe approach, which we want to develop. So that's all a number of issues which we want to use to really make the EU in foreign policy more effective. Next to the concrete support of the High Representative in managing important CFSP files which are on the table. You mentioned, and thank you for mentioning that, our Center of Excellence for Civilian Crisis Management. We believe civilian crisis management is absolutely important, and we want to open such a Center of Excellence in Berlin, for civilian crisis operation. That is an important issue. Also, absolutely say that to underline this element of climate in trade policy is important for us. On enlargement, as I said, it is good. I like also the concept of the ring of friends. To get the ring of friends closer to you, actually also within the EU, there is also the question of the conditionality. I think the conditionality, the Copenhagen criteria, in particular also the rule of law conditionality is very important. And these conditionalities have been formulated also a number very precisely for the enlargement conditions in general, but also for starting accession negotiations with possibly with Northern Macedonia and Albania. And on Turkey, of course, the discussions are wide-ranging. It's going from also in security policy, a wide area, and we have the question of migration. We have also a number of difficult discussions when you think, for example, on drilling activities around Cyprus. So this is really a very broad discussions which we're pursuing, where there's also been discussions by the High Representative with Turkey, and this remains, of course, an issue which is very important in the whole external actions agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dittmann. We're now gonna move on to the next topic, and you were also highlighting it already during your introductory keynote, that this is also, of course, a priority, and that is also a priority of the youth, and which is climate policy, of course. And I'm curious to see whether the young generation shares the conviction of Gabi Umbach, another contributor to our TEPSA recommendations, that the post-COVID-19 recovery offers a window of opportunity to reinforce the sustainability of the EU's development model. And how she also framed it, we should, however, not forget that this also obliges the EU to put its money where its mouth has been for decades. So let's see what the Stefan Naumann can report us with regards to the young ideas.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil, but I guess generally we would agree. Let me quickly share the presentation. To me and to many of my generation, it feels completely redundant to introduce climate policy with another reference to its magnitude or the urgency to respond to the crisis. We need climate action now. The current health and economic crisis undoubtedly presents a formidable challenge, but we cannot afford to relegate climate policy to second-tier politics any longer. We, the Delegation for Climate Policy of the Engagement Council project, call on the German presidency to do its utmost to continue the legislative processes related to the European Green Deal and to ensure constructive co-legislation between Council and Parliament, also with regards to the multi-annual financial framework. The MFF must reflect the need to recover from Corona and its recession more sustainable and greener. We therefore call on the German presidency to support the development of Next Generation EU into an active common industrial policy with clear objectives to facilitate and kickstart the green transformation of Europe. Central sectors are the common agricultural policy, where a mechanism should ensure that the share of sustainable agriculture funding increases between yearly budgets beyond the current Commission proposal, and the energy union, where substantial funds should be allocated to deepen integration and grid development of renewable energies across the Union. Our second proposal concerns another key sector of green transformation, transport. Our vision is for a sustainably interconnected Europe, where rail travel can compete with aerial travel both in terms of pricing and duration. Connecting Europe through a high-speed train network, in our eyes, also has a strong symbolic value, both for a deepening of European integration and the green transformation, and could be the flagship project of the industrial policy we propose. Lastly, and I suppose here I have to applaud your being here and listening to us, Mr. Dittmann, we emphasize the need for citizens' participation of the green transformation, as it will not be possible without the commitment and ownership of citizens. We envision to build upon the framework of the Conference on the Future of Europe and to establish a regular European Citizens' Assembly. In light of the limitations of Corona, it will also be important to use existing channels of digital participation actively and promote them towards citizens. Ultimately, the ongoing crisis may indeed be seized as an opportunity to become greener and more sustainable. Climate policy is not in trade-off with social or economic policy or geopolitical aspirations. It's a precondition for the continued viability for all three of those policy areas. We need climate action now. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, for yet again another set of very clear and concise presentation of the ideas. And I think we share, you know, as you already said in the beginning, the estimation that we cannot afford recovery first and climate second, as you said it, also stated in your youth ideas. So I would want to simply move, give the floor to Axel Dittmann right away, whether he would want to react to that. I really thought it was very interesting that you also wanted to involve the citizens and generate citizens' ownership. I think this is very important, an important point, and I turn the floor to Axel Dittmann.
Yeah, on the different issues, I agree, and I think it is reflected in our program, which you will see, and we absolutely don't want that we have a situation where we have now the COVID-19 pandemic, and that we lose sight of the overall fundamental challenge So when we come the whole MFF Next Generation EU really is a vehicle to work for green recovery. You mentioned a number of percentages also. I think in the MFF we want to have a minimum of 25% climate-related expenditures in the common agriculture policy. I think the goal is to have a 40% related to climate, so that is important for us. When it comes about continuing legislation, I agree. I tried to mention a few things where we're going to work on, and I think the absolutely important is to try to finalize the European climate law, which will subscribe and cement really the goals to have climate neutrality until 2050. As I said, working together to define the NDCs 2030, very important. And this is something we're going to push forward. And I think there were also important statements by the Federal Chancellor in the Petersberg dialogue on this one. And finally, on the future of Europe, I think we share the view. Climate will be, I guess, absolutely crucial discussion point there. And we also have to find the right formats to involve the citizens very actively. And this is something where the institutions now will work on. I think there are also ideas on this already being discussed within the European Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dittmann. And now we're into the final round of youth ideas, at least. And this was more a topic which we broadly called the future of Europe. And there, the participants or members of the think tank were then asked to develop their ideas on what they think is important for the future of Europe. And I think it's not to our surprise that, of course, here it's also about engaging citizens and other topics. And I'm going to give the floor now to João Gomes, who will present the ideas to us.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm talking to you from Porto in Portugal and speaking on behalf of the Future of Europe delegation. First of all, I would like to start by saying that it was indeed a challenge to embrace such a broad topic, the future of Europe. However, our committee was aware that the goals to be achieved in the mid to long term require short-term action. So with one foot on the digital revolution and the other one on the emerging Euroscepticism, we drifted away from policy, particularly the one debated already by the other working groups, and kept our focus on precise measures that can be implemented right away to bring Europe closer to its citizens. Being so, what better way to start this than to start with education, actually? Our first measure aims precisely at the development of a unified political science education hub. Yes, there are already individual institutions offering full degrees on this matter, but no, such a vast amount of already existing information is not centralized, and it's not easy for us as citizens with no prior education on these matters to be informed on policy and to debate it with our peers across nations. There's no need for a degree to understand Europe, or at least there shouldn't be. As for our second idea, we would like to invite you to envision it with us. I'm talking about the creation of an European Citizens' Assembly. It's certainly bold for several reasons, but if implemented, we believe that it could definitely be a flag to be waved at a global scale. We want to see ensured the representativity of all countries in a virtual assembly that provides both an opportunity to debate, but above all, to introduce ideas on an universal suffrage basis to be considered for discussion in the European Parliament. And finally, our third idea aims to establish intercultural bonds while supporting a field that was particularly affected by the current COVID-19 pandemic, culture itself. We want to invite the trio presidency of the Council of the EU to create European-wide itinerant cultural events with a single program for the next 3 mandates, the following 18 months, and a shared showcase of emerging national artists in the audiovisual and plastic arts fields. Itinerant as it is, it should cover several cities through all the member states with, for example, closing events in the European capitals of culture. Of course, implementing these 3 ideas presents as a challenge as they are not just policy driven. Nevertheless, we strongly believe that the greater the challenge, the greater the impact. And if we ought to look into a strong and united Europe for the future, we have to start by uniting citizens and by giving them tools to trust and desire the European project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Zhao, for this final presentation of the youth ideas. As I said, I think it is very interesting to see, and of course highly relevant to see, that you also kind of made your ideas about how to engage with the citizens. You promote the idea of European citizens' assemblies. So here the question would be of whether this could be a structuring principle for the conference on the future of Europe, or how to organize this conference in order to engage with the citizens. Because also we think that it is highly important to kind of reestablish trust in the European Union, which might have been affected also by the multiple crises in the past years. So the conference on the future of Europe is also something that we have already mentioned quite several times. I also like the idea of this creation of cultural events, and I found it interesting that Axel Dittmann was also mentioning it already during his keynote. So what I would suggest now is to have a brief reaction by Axel Dittmann, and then I would, if he has the time, just because there are some Q&As, some questions in the Q&A section, which I might also want will then collect in the final round. So first reaction to these ideas, and then we're going to have a final round of questions, if possible, in order to wrap up and have a final reaction by Mr. Dittmann.
Thank you. I like these proposals. They are also very concrete. Education is important, absolutely important for Europe. In the MFF, we have which we want to also make with a view to modernizing it. There we have, I think, a quite substantial increase. For example, in Erasmus and European the ESF. Trying to accentuate, to increase the efforts on education is on the agenda, is very important. On the virtual assembly, I think we have to now really work together to define the mandate, and then to see the setting for the conference on the future of Europe. I can say that we begin to do that now in the institutions, and it will be important to have a real and a very substantial involvement of the citizens, to have this debate, which will go beyond a citizens dialogue 2.0. So really have the concrete input also on very concrete issues, and this is something which now will have to be started when setting up not just the institutional mandate, but also to the real framework, how to organize and how to implement the conference. So thank you for that. And on the cultural events, this is a very important and very good idea. As I said in my start, or not to repeat myself, we have to try it already for our cultural program to broaden it. I mean, we have a very important anniversary also of Beethoven, which of course we will also highlight and bring about. But the cultural project by Olafur Eliasson goes beyond this. He also really aims to have a contribution by young Europeans, by children all across the EU. We'll also have something which we'll call the Faces of Europe, where we are going to make exhibition photography from Europeans all over the EU. A number of other, there will be a game which I think will be online on the July. Everyone who wants to play. So this is something, but we will really take up also the suggestion to organize, and there are discussions already to do it together with our trio partners. So thank you also again for this suggestion.
Okay, thank you. And I would want to at least take up in a final round, collect some of the questions that have been put into the Q&A. And most of them, of course, are addressed to you, Mr. Dittmann, but there's also one question to Stefan Naumann. So maybe if you, Mr. Dittmann, could elaborate a bit more on the following things. And it's again, you know, broad through the broad table of issues that we are faced with. But first of all, it's the question of given the time limitation for negotiating the MFF, is there sufficient time to integrate a rule of law mechanism into this MFF? Another question that was kind of prioritized also by some participants is relating to the climate question, and here is in 2030 EU NDC target higher than 55% realistic, and who will finally decide? There was a question, a very comprehensive question on the UK and the Brexit issue, but I would think that we can transfer that into our next session in order to save some time. And there was one rather, also challenging question or provocation, basically, in terms of did the Franco-German proposal for a recovery program help or hinder its chances of being accepted by the European Council, especially when a German is president of the Commission and the German presidency is imminent? That was asked by a Brit, just to give you a background on that. And then, Stefan, there was a question also addressed to you, and I think we could start then the final round with your thoughts on that, because I think it's also highly relevant, because of, I think we all agree that the COVID-19 pandemic could be a chance for kind of, you know, working on a green recovery. However, there was the question of how you can reconcile, you know, the aim of extending the railway system when currently there are more preferences for using private transportation in order to kind of protect oneself against the virus. So did you also consider that when you were thinking about your idea and recommendations? So Stefan, I'm going to give the floor to you, and then we will conclude with Mr. Dittmann.
Yes, I'll try to make it short. Our proposal is generally intended for a longer term, also the update of rail infrastructure in Europe, probably, or hopefully, we would find a vaccine before new lines of railway could become operable. Generally, however, also from an epidemiological standpoint, if people do not have the possibility to travel individually over a long distance, train is a lot safer than airplane. So maybe the quintessential message that my group would want to pass is don't fly, use other means of transport. That's it.
Okay, thank you. And now, Mr. Dittmann, for a final round of answers.
Yeah, thank you. I think I will try to react directly to those questions. Rule of law conditionality is for us an important element in the MFF proposal. We have maintained that all along, and for us it is absolutely important to have to integrate this rule of law and conditionality in the MFF. It is was part of the February package. It is again in the proposal of the Commission, which is now on the table, and important element for us. The 2030 NDCs, it was on the agenda of the European Council in October. I think this we'll have to see how Charles Michel handled it. Of course, such an important issue that it will be discussed by the heads of state and government. As I said, Angela Merkel, she made important also positioning for us there in the framework of the Petersberg dialogue. On the Franco-German initiative, did it help or hinder? I think it is an important step. So also an important step that we have taken. We are grateful that the Commission has taken that up, and I can say that there are many difficult questions which have to be discussed and resolved by the heads of state and government. One is, there are many, like the overall size, the allocation mechanism, the conditionalities, grants, loans percentage, how to then repay everything. But I would say that the basic framework to give the Commission the possibility to raise capital, that in the expenditure programs, also element of the German proposal. So, but now we're speaking about what the Commission has tabled. This is the important thing now, and so I believe it has helped. But why don't we wait for the European Council in 17-18 July? We will certainly need with everyone important contribution, but now we know there are difficult discussions ahead of us.
Thank you, Mr. Dittmann. And I think you're right. And as I said in the beginning, you know, it is of course an honorable task to take over the presidency. It entails lots of chances also to have also an influence and impact on the European Union and the integration process. But also in these times, it might be an uninviable task because you really have a lot of things to do. It's a challenge, but I'm sure that it's going to be a successful presidency, and we will closely monitor it, and we're going to discuss all the different aspects in the next sessions today and tomorrow. And I really thank you for joining us also to this opening session today. It was very insightful and informative. And we learned at least a lot of things on the details of the presidency. And I also would like to thank everybody for having kind of started into this virtual endeavor of having a pre-presidency conference in virtual means. We did encounter some technical problems, but I think we can learn from that, and we'll be able to continue just as successfully as this session. So thank you to all contributors, particularly also to the young rapporteurs who were bold enough to speak to us in front of this audience. And yes, I wish all of us inspiring times and a good lunch break, and hopefully to reconvene and see all of you at 2 p.m. when we discuss the Brexit issue. Thank you very much.